Good evening and welcome to the news broadcast at iNN Headlines and Beyond for March 29th, 2012. It's Thursday and we are wrapping up another week of headlines. The primaries are chugging along, and as I look around, I peruse around to sort of see what the candidates are saying and what's being brought up by various different news organizations, and it's pretty much the same thing. Is you either have not much being said, or you get basically when you go off to these the comedy shows, you get this is where most of the comments are made, and they're primarily left leaning shows. For some reasons, the Democrats have chosen to have their policy stated by comedians who have nothing more in terms of their qualification than they're actually comedians. But this is because all that the social left has left is mocking, and if you're all going to do is mock, then a comedian is the perfect way to present this mocking argument against some of the things put forward by the Republicans. But the thing is, the Republicans aren't doing the job they're supposed to be doing either. Talking about this whole today, they were talking about the budget, and the whole left-right battle ensued over the budget, and because of the Republicans' fear, their irrational fear, the xenophobia of immigrant labor, what you end up with is you wind up that the Republicans cannot respond and say to the social left and the people of Obama that the successes in China and India are basically Republican, because what the Chinese and Indians did is remove their social economic system and brought in the Reagan economic system. They literally took the American system and applied it in India and China. And these are the results. So there is no argument anymore over which systems work better, because all you have to do is compare China and India to Europe, right? And you can see the contrast between the two. You can see, but the thing is, the Republicans have chosen to stay a very white party. It really hasn't become inclusive, and this is going to be its big downfall, because let's say that it had one. This is why it should embrace immigrants. The left argues that the immigrants are their domain, that they're there, they speak for the immigrants, that they're social left, they're all inclusive, and everyone's all hunky-dory. But sit down and talk to any of the immigrants. And I know this from firsthand because I live in a predominantly immigrant neighborhood. And what I see is that most immigrants are conservative in terms of their family values. Most immigrants are independent business owners. Most immigrants want low taxes. They don't want the government involved in their lives. And this says Republican to me. But yet the Republicans have completely tossed out this entire immigrant vote. They're not even looking at the immigrant vote. I mean, so there is no people on Fox News and on CNN saying that the Republicans, no one wants to tackle the immigration issue. And for me, this is a stupid position that the Republicans have taken. Because if a majority of the immigrants coming in are fundamentally what Republicans say they're about, independence, conservative family values, and low taxes, and then this is exactly the people that they want to bring in. This is their core constituency. But yet they've completely locked these people out, and because they've locked these people out, because they've demonized India and China, when the left comes up with an argument saying, "Oh, the government needs to step in and provide services X, Y, and Z," they can't. The Republicans can't say anything about that because they've demonized, they've destroyed their arguments by standing against this, against immigrants and immigrant labor. I mean, I don't see. I'm not. And just again, another disclosure here. I'm not in the European white category, and I'm off to the side of the European white category because my ethnic background is the darker Greek, the dark Greek Middle Eastern background that goes all the way off into India, and then go south into North Africa, which would be Egypt and that area there. So I'm not a Euro Greek, a Asia Minor and Middle Eastern Indian Greek. Those are the two particular boundaries, and there are cultural differences between the two. Many of the Euro Greeks are very socialist. They're left leaning. They love big government, while the Euro Greeks, the sort of the non-Euro European Greeks, are primarily village people. They're immigrants. They're primarily owners and they're very owners of independent businesses, and their family dynamics are they're for and support traditional conservative family values. They're very conservative on this on this thing here. So they would be a perfect fit for conservatives and a perfect fit for Republicans. But I said, for some reason, the Republicans really have backed off on this. We haven't seen any of Republicans really sort of embrace this. I haven't seen any of the advisors, anyone in the advisory areas to the Republicans, say anything about this. So for the Republicans, this is a missed opportunity. And from my perspective, I can sort of see where the left has completely failed, and their arguments now is just, as I said, satire has to have some degree of reality behind its argument. When that degree of reality is gone, and you've got no reality left, all you're left with is mocking. And this is what happens on the Jon Stewart. What was this? Stephen Colbert. A lot of these left comedians. I see, even on Jimmy Kimmel, watching Piers Morgan from CNN. CNN is primarily left. If you watch the differences between Anderson Cooper and Erin Burnett, you'll see that Erin Burnett is still slightly left-leaning. Her bias is not overt. It's not out there. It's really in the show. It's in the stuff that you don't see in the show. There's a lot of materials that you don't see in Erin Burnett. That this is where you can sort of see the bias come in, but she's not overtly biased on her show. Where Anderson Cooper is just completely right over the edge. And also, this is true for Piers Morgan, who, for some reason, this is the attitude of the left, and this is how dismissive they are. Any argument that they disagree with, any position they disagree with, is immediately dismissed as nonsensical, irrational, and yet when you're talking about traditional family values, the argument that the left has is complete crap, because as soon as you really step out of the European sphere of things and into the immigrant world, where you have a lot of different cultures in there, it's not simply the Christian culture that has strong traditional values. It can be seen all across the East, no matter what religion they are, whether they're Hindus, Buddhists, or whatever. There are very strong family values there that are based along the traditional family guidelines. And so what happens is that the we'll call it modern family that's being pushed on ABC and stuff like that, and you're seeing being pushed in the media, is approximately, it's less than 20 years old. It popped up in 1990, so it's about 22 years old. If we're going to get down to and this is you have to use the 22 because they haven't been around as long as the older cultures. I mean, if you're talking about the traditional family values, you're talking close to well, more than 6,000 years worth of human history against 22 years, right? This is what they've dismissed. The left dismisses 6,000 years worth of human history for a concept that's just about 22 years old. And they dismiss this 6,000-year-old idea of conservative family values, of traditional family values, as nonsensical, and they simply then move on from there without presenting any arguments for. They use their mocking as the argument, and because there is no real argument behind it, there's no way to counter what they say because these people aren't listening anyway. They're simply dismissing it. What's his name? Bill Maher has done the same thing. If you watch his shows, any argument that comes from the right is presented with this standard left socialist ignorance of essentially a mocking dismissal argument, where they laugh it out and go, "There goes that crazy person again," And there's no real fundamental argument behind it. You get a lot of applause from the audience. You get a popularity vote, but there's no scrutinization of the argument. There's no real we'll call a real counter argument. There's no real counter argument to it. But the thing is, this is because if you're arguing simply, and this is the way the philosophy behind socialism is a philosophy that everything is a concept, and this is what gives nihilists and anarchists their basic view. Then it doesn't matter what argument you're standing on, anyways. And this is why, for many of these people who, like P.S. Morgan calls himself a Christian, he's not really a Christian. He's more of a concept Christian. He believes in the concept of Christianity, but he's not actually a Christian. Because a Christian is, in a lot of stuff, you are by what you behave. So if you stand up and you say you're a Christian, but along the way you start dismissing this and you start dismissing that, and you just start, a lot of the fundamentals of Christianity, you start dismissing them. Then you may state that you're a Christian, but in reality you're not a Christian. But if you're a person who simply believes in concept and everything is a concept, then who cares? Because everything's a concept anyways. And there's no way to argue against this person because this person never sees reality to begin with. If you're always viewing the world as a concept and everything in the world as a concept, and that only your concepts are right, then no matter what other concepts are presented to you, you will never see these concepts as real because they're foreign and contradictory to your own concepts. And yet these same people who consider themselves to be open-minded individuals are nothing but, because they'll fall in line with what everybody else says, and they're not gonna think about what people say as long as they agree with them. There's no self-scrutiny. There's no self-analysis. There's no self-criticism. And there's no, in this case, no self-improvement. And when we see this as Canada goes through its more left-leaning phases now, in this opening up of the brothel, and people say, "Oh, why not open up a brothel? What's wrong with having consenting adults do these things? They're all right. They have their choice. They can do this." Well, just simply look at these areas and look into the more social, the more liberal, the sexually liberal Europe. What do we see? We see an increase in sexual slavery. We see an increase of sexual abuse. We see an increase of essentially, crime. We see, we see a lot of the problems, the social problems that come with open sexuality increases as you open the sexuality in society. And you go into any of these so-called open sexually areas where you have a lot of prostitutes in there. No one wants to live in the areas. The areas that people want to live in, ironically, and this is what's so ironic about the left, is the left look at the conservative neighborhoods, which are predominantly upscale, and they're fairly quiet, and they want to move into these neighborhoods because they have the better schools, they have the better. And the thing is, they don't understand that the conservative neighborhoods have these better schools, the better houses, the better income, because they are conservative. As soon as you remove that conservative value, you're going back towards what you see in the urban areas. The urban areas are the way they are because of the behavior of the people in the urban centers. The suburban areas and the suburban neighborhoods, and this includes some of the country neighborhoods, are the way they are, again, because of the way the people behave and believe. Change this, move the country into the urban behavior, and move the urban behavior to a country behavior or a suburban behavior, and you'll change the circumstances. You'll see wealth increase and stability increase in the urban areas, and where you see the liberalization of these conservative areas, you'll see a degradation in society. This can be seen throughout history. If you study the fall of the Roman Empire, this can be seen, this dynamic can be seen. But yet, none of these arguments can ever be made because everything is dismissed by these intellectual left people. And the thing is, they're not even intellectual. If you actually sit down and look at the amount of information that's available, the amount of information that's out there, you'll find that most people who call themselves intellectually left or intellectuals are very narrow-minded in their experiences with things outside of their own zones, outside of themselves, their own sense of ego, really is significantly limited. It's not until you step outside of your own sense of reality and your own sense of self. And I know my parents who are from Boston have really mentioned this when they've gone back to Boston. And see, in Toronto, we're used to having immigrants all around us, living in what we call more or less an immigrant society, because in Toronto, immigrants are not forced to assimilate. So if a Chinese store moves in next to you, the store is going to be Chinese. If it's another type of Asian store, it's going to be, no one from their ethnic background is ever forced to assimilate in Toronto. So Toronto, you can walk around all these different neighborhoods and get a sense of real culture from all these different people. And when you go back to Boston or any other places, my parents have done this as they're cleaning up. They've been cleaning up my late grandmother's properties. She died several years ago, and they've gone back to clean out the storage units and all the stuff left over from the house. And one of the comments, the things that struck them as they went into Boston, and Boston is a fairly metropolitan area, is how white Boston is compared to Toronto. You do have your sections of immigrant areas, but they really assimilate. Where here in Toronto, there is no assimilation. You can really go around and see all the different varieties of cultures and existences. And as soon as you do this, and you start, and I said this has always been my fascination, is to see how a lot of the new immigrants who come into Toronto are almost exactly the same way the immigrants from Greece were, and they were all from these old villages and stuff like that. And one of the things, one of the tricks that they pull, and they pull this on the police, is in Toronto we have they try to bring in these very strict environmental laws about where you could and couldn't fish. And I used to go out with some of my younger friends. We used to go out fishing, and there'd be these old men from these variety of different older villages out there fishing in areas that clearly have the sign that say no fishing. But this is where some of the best fish were, and they were catching fish, and this is what they wanted to do. The police officer pulls up and says, well, you can't be fishing here. And they go, eh? Huh? And the officer repeats himself, sorry, no English. And the guy keeps trying to talk to him, and some of the other men who start coming around who are maybe of different backgrounds, and all of a sudden none of them speak English. And the thing is, a lot of them really don't speak English. And the officer gets so flustered that he goes, and forgets it, and just sort of gets back in his car and drives off and leaves them alone. Now, I know people personally who get very offended by this, and say that these people who don't know English shouldn't be here in the country. They shouldn't change the neighborhoods to their own their own cultural neighborhoods, and that they should Canadianize. But from my perspective, this is something that I enjoy. I enjoy experiencing other cultures, and because that if we're going to say that the Greeks are Hellenic, and basically Christians are fundamentally Hellenic as well. Hellenism brought in the concept of globalism, but not globalism in the sense that you brought everything to you directly from your own perspective, but that you could be an Indian, you could be whatever you are, and whatever you wanted to be wherever you are. And this was sort of the same thing with Christianity. The original Christianity wasn't about nationality. This whole Greek Orthodox, the Hellenic Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, the whatever Orthodox or whatever Christian group you belonged to, that is something that evolved much later on. It actually evolved more than 1,000 years after the original church formed. So if you're looking at the church and saying, oh, the church is all divided into all these different nationalities, this is something that developed later. It's a later invention that came into the church. It's not part of the original Christian church. If you sat down and you study the ancient manuscripts from prior to 1000 A.D. As a matter of fact, if you study the manuscripts from 1000 A.D. and prior, you'll find a lot of discrepancies between the early church and what we see now as the church. And none of this experience is ever seen in Piers Morgan. It's not seen in any of the left arguments. It's certainly not seen in any of the professors who are from these different units and claim to be these monumental intellectuals. But the thing is, they've never really stepped outside of their academic circle. And most academics who are professors who go to these soirees and dinners and stuff like that rarely ever step out of their peer environments. So in other words, and this is where people prefer this. People prefer to stay within their peer environments and develop their social ranking within the peer environment. And as this occurs, you'll develop sort of an isolation simply within the peer group. So if you're a professor and you're an academic, your peer grouping that you'll primarily stay with, your comfort grouping, is going to be other professors who are like-minded with you. And if you don't step out of that comfort zone, then your thoughts and your understandings will be influenced by the peer grouping that you're with. And this is sort of what's happened to these social intellectuals. They've become fundamentally ignorant to the changes in the world that have gone around them. The world has globalized. And as the globalization has occurred, the ethnic barriers that sort of separated different ethnicities have sort of come down, but it hasn't penetrated the academic wall. In order to get through the academic wall, you have to be Western thinking, You have to be European thinking, and there is nothing that's going to change this, because the system, the academic system in the United States and Europe, forces the person coming into the system to change their mind, to change their behavior, to conform to the Western academic standard. And this is the ignorance that festers and attacks and blinds the social left. And until this is broken, and you see this in Piers Morgan, you see this in Jon Stewart, you see this in Stephen Colbert, you see this in 95% of the social left argument. This is what you see: is you see an intellectual ignorance, a Western mindset that is ignorant to the rest of the world. And this is where the modern values sit. When you hear them talking about modern values on TV, the modern family values, this modern value set sits in ignorance of the world around it, and expects everybody else in the world to conform to its ideals and standards. And then says, oh, we shouldn't be bullies. Well, that's not reality, and that's not what's going to happen. And so this, again, comes when we're now going out to discuss the latest Obama move to start reducing subsidies for oil companies. And the thing is, on the surface of it, it sounds good. But again, knowing the socialists, knowing the social left like Obama, there is more to this than it appears. The socialists always talk about freedom. They're always talking about equality. But when you sit down and you look at the details of what they're actually presenting, it's nothing. It's not anywhere. It's not anything about freedom. It's not anything about equality, but about their own sense of power and their own sense of ego. And so when we come back into the second half, we will continue on with the oil argument and Obama's statement against oil subsidies, and then continue on to the foreign affairs analysis.